Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 4 of I'd Quit But I'm Broke, brought to you by Student Beans. How have you been this week, Grace?
Not too bad. Yeah, less busy than last week. So
That's always good to hear.
Yeah. What about yourself?
Just as busy as last week.
Oh, it never ends with you, does it?
It never does.
I'm actually a bit excited today because we've got our first ever sponsor.
Oh, that is great news.
Yeah, so we're sponsored this episode by 1 Million Mentors, which is an amazing community-based mentoring project. And it's designed to connect 1 million young people with businesses and professionals to share advice, really. So I feel like you could gain quite a lot of knowledge out of it, some new skills, great for networking. So if you want to find out a little bit more or maybe even sign up, definitely check them out. Their website is 1millionmentors.org.uk.
And make sure you do. They are a really great organisation and it's a really good opportunity for students to get involved with.
100%. This week we are speaking to Yasmin Meeda, who's a marine biologist, and she's currently studying her PhD at the University of Exeter and the Marine Biological Association. So, Matt, I feel like you've got quite a bit in common with Yasmin. Both studied at University of Exeter and both science degrees. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, I can't complain really. For the listeners that don't know, I did my undergraduate in physics at the University of Exeter. I'd never really had much of a biology background, but I was physics, so, maybe me and Yaz have something to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. Like the most in common out of all of our guests so far, I would say.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I actually did a biophysics dissertation, so I won't bore you with the details, but maybe me and Yaz can talk about it off screen.
Yeah, definitely. She should be kind of interested to know about that. So this is my big thing. Do you do a lot of practicals in the degree?
Yeah, we do a lot of practicals. So our practicals were 9 hours long on Thursdays, and our big night outs were Wednesdays.
Oh.
So that would end up me getting home about 3 a.m. and my labs would start at 9 a.m. So I'd drag myself out of bed. I live about 45 minutes away from campus at this point as well.
Oh, no, even worse.
Drag myself out of bed. And in the first 3 or 4 hours, I'd just upset my lab partner because I wasn't doing any work and I was in a bad state. I'd go and have lunch and then I'd do a little bit of work and go home early and have a nap.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Had they been out, your lab partner, and were just really good at coping with hangovers, or were they more like...
No, they weren't.
Oh, they'd not been out.
No, they hadn't. I owe her an apology.
Yeah, definitely. I hope she didn't fail any practicals because of...
Oh no, we got a good grade.
Oh, a few. Okay. Yeah, that's good. That is good, definitely. Brilliant. Welcome to the podcast, Yaz.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
No, it's great for you to be here. For our listeners that maybe don't know about you or want to find out a little bit more, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So my name's Yaz. I'm a current PhD student at the University of Exeter and the Marine Biological Association. I'm in my second year of my PhD. I also do science communication on Instagram with an @ Marine Biology with Yaz. And that is mainly just to try and show people what we get up to in the science world and what it might look like to be a scientist in the lab.
So you're just opening the door a little bit on science.
Yes, definitely. I think sometimes people have this idea that scientists are maybe something else or what you see in films, but actually it's just regular people. So really just wanting to showcase what we get up to and showing that anyone can do it.
Oh, that's really interesting. And we are going to jump back into that, but we always start these episodes with icebreaker questions. So, what was the worst style choice you ever made?
This is a really funny one, I think. Did you guys ever go to these under 17 clubs where you...
They were actually kind of moving out when I was getting up to 16, 17, so never did know.
Yeah, so it was one of those where they opened the clubs up. So for any listeners who don't know, it would be an actual nightclub that would open their doors from the age of 13 to 17. You could attend and it was like your own little night out at a nightclub. Me and my friends decided that we'd go to a shop and get neon tutus, neon laces for our plimsolls, and neon beads, and we would go out and we thought we looked really, really cool. And I look back on those photos and there was 6 of us and we're all in a line posing, and we just got these bright neon colours, and it's just, yeah, it's really embarrassing.
That sounds like, when people dress up 80s style.
Yeah.
It gives me that vibe.
Yeah, but we were only 14, 15, so I don't know why we thought it would be really cool. Really embarrassing.
Who was your childhood actor/actress crush?
Oh, so I'd say I watched the film Step Up growing up, and I absolutely fell in love with Channing Tatum. I thought just everything about him, everything about the film, I was just obsessed. I just wanted to dance and do stuff like that just because of the film.
Did you ever have a poster of him up in your room?
I was never really a poster person, but I think I can't remember if these were the same times where you had social media, but it was a bit more Bebo or MySpace days, so you could follow these pages, and I think it was more I followed pages on social media rather than having posters up.
Fan pages, yeah. I feel like that's a relatable one,
Yeah.
actually. Channing Tatum, definitely.
And final one, what is one thing we don't know about you?
This is really hard. I feel like these are things that it's quite obvious to you that maybe other people don't know. But I'm quite double jointed. I think that's something that's weird. Yeah, like my fingers bend a little bit. I don't know if you want to see.
I don't know if we want to see. yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
I want to see it.
I'm a bit bendy. So all my fingers just bend a little bit and they all go backwards. It's really weird, isn't it?
How did you discover that was the
I
case?
think-
Was it by accident?
I think it was. It was even probably doing science practicals. I was like holding something and someone was like, oh, why do your fingers look weird? And I was like, oh, is this not normal? So I think that's something that's like my almost party trick hidden talent that no one really seems to know. But sometimes people might see a picture and be like, oh, are you okay? Your fingers look a bit weird. And I'm like, oh.
That's brilliant. Just fingers, or is it other?
It's pretty much just fingers.
Oh my
It's the
God.
weirdest thing ever.
That's brilliant.
So we want to move on now into your job history.
Yeah.
What is the worst job you've ever done?
So my worst job, I feel like there may be a few that I've had experience with, but my ultimate worst time job, I worked at an industrial laundrette. So this is basically a massive factory. We provided workwear for people that were doing welding or all different kinds of businesses. So there were the massive overalls that were fire retardant and really, really thick. So it was kind of like we washed them and put labels on, so people who had their name tags and stuff on it. So it was this real sort of massive, cold-looking building, and there was just these massive washing machines that would just churn away, and it was just like a chug, chug.
Oh,
And then
no.
we'd stand there on these tables, and we would get the garments out of the washing machine, put them into a dryer. Once they'd dried, we would then actually take all these clothes and we'd fold them. So we basically just folded them into nice little parcel-sized kind of garments. And then we had to then put them in boxes and then tape up all the boxes and then ship them out. But you can imagine we did this 8 to 10 hours a day.
Oh
So the
my
amount
God.
of clothes that were coming in, it was just constant.
And was this a student job or were you younger?
So I actually did that job from 15 years old. So it was over the summer holidays and sort of weekend works, just saving up. So I really wanted to get a car at 17 and I was like, okay, I need some money. So I kind of did it from about 15 to maybe 21.
Oh, so you stuck at it a long time.
I
Yeah, I was
did,
going to say.
yeah.
I wasn't expecting you to say that long.
No, it was better money, I think, than what other people were on. If other people were on minimum wage, we were getting a lot more money because it was manual labour. So I stuck at it for the money.
What was probably the worst thing that ever happened there? Was there like a particular moment that was just really terrible, like a story?
Yeah, there's just always different things that go on. But mainly it was that we were running late and running behind. So we had so many, like hundreds to thousands of garments that needed to go out at sort of 2 or 3 o'clock that day. And we just were no way near it. And then the machines were failing. And everyone was just running around rushing. And they were putting a lot of pressure on you to be like, okay, you need to be folding more clothes at a rate that I've never folded clothes. And then they'd complain if it wasn't as it should be. So it was just one of those ones where you've got so many deadlines. But I think actually it's helped me now that when I have deadlines, I'm like, oh, I can kind of work under pressure.
I've folded 100 garments in a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
So how much were you getting paid at that time?
I think at that time, I think it increased when I reached a certain age. So I think at 15, it was maybe only like £7 an hour. But I think at that time, people were on like £5.
Yeah.
It was sort of back in the day. Like,
That's really not bad at 15 years old.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
no. And then I think it increased to about £10 an hour, which again was a lot more than any of my friends were ever earning. So I was like, oh, this is quite good. So that's why I stuck at it.
And how much money would we have to pay you to go back?
I think quite a lot. I think for me it was quite boring in the sense that I like to read stuff and feel like I'm doing something. Or even for me now when I'm in the lab, even if I'm doing something that's with my hands, I can listen to music and stuff or a podcast that can get me through. So I think maybe unless I can listen to podcasts and music all the time, maybe you could get me back with a little bit of cash.
How much is a little bit of cash? You got a figure in mind?
Is this hourly rate or is it like a...
Yeah, let's go hourly.
Hourly. Well, to be honest, I'm on a PhD stipend, so we don't get that much now anyway. So maybe like 30 quid an hour would get me back there.
Nice. I think I'd do it for £30 an hour.
And what do you think it was that kept you there all those years?
I think it was mainly because I'd tried other jobs, so I'd waitressed and I'd worked in retail. And I think it was mainly just the money, that I'd work all these ridiculous hours. And I think the one thing that was really great is that you didn't have any customers.
Oh, true, yeah.
So you could kind of go in, and if you were a little bit hungover or you weren't feeling it, you didn't have to deal with anyone else, which was quite nice. Whereas all my other jobs I'd worked with, you'd have customers that you had to always smile and say, oh, everything's fine. And so, yeah.
So it was kind of a best out of the bad bunch situation.
I think so, yeah, definitely.
If there's anything you could say to your old boss, have you got anything in mind you'd want to say to them?
Ooh, maybe they might listen. No, I don't think so. I think it was like, maybe just thank you for keeping me there, because I don't feel like I gave 100% most of the time. I think it was everyone else around me worked a lot harder, and I think I was slacking quite a lot. Sometimes I might hide in between the garments. So they had these rows of garments, and sometimes I'd just hide and sit on my phone. And if anyone came looking for me, I'd be like, oh, I couldn't find something. So I think, yeah, that's really bad, isn't it?
Yeah, you did well to keep that job.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you to my boss that kept me.
That's the nicest answer to that question we've had so
Yeah.
far.
Really?
Thinking that.
Yeah, I think it was because I didn't hate it in the sense of I just wanted money, and that was what it gave me money, even though I complained 24/7.
Yeah.
I think I'm a big complainer.
It was a horrible job, but the money was good. So if you had to rate this job out of 5, 1 being you'd never do it again, worst student job ever, 5 being it was an okay student job, where would you rate it?
I'd probably go in the middle 3, because I think even though I was always tired and it was different to most jobs that anyone really ever does when they're a student, it was because I didn't have the customers that may moan at me for doing anything wrong, and because I could kind of, I could hide away. I'd say that it wasn't bad, but also I wouldn't wish it on other people. I think there probably are other jobs that you could do that don't have you standing at a table for 8 hours a day folding clothes.
Yeah, that's a really fair answer. Moving on to a section which we like to call listener questions. So we asked our listeners to send in some questions for you, and we've got some really good ones. So the first one is, what books should you read if you are interested in marine biology?
Ooh, that's a brilliant question. I think there are so many books that you could read. So one thing about marine biology is that it is such a broad field. There are so many different sections to it. So you've got the conservation side, the ecology side, molecular biology. So I guess there are loads of different books you could get. But for people to start off, it would probably be one of the introduction to marine biology books that you can get. And there are quite a few different authors that write them. But if people want something that is more of an introduction to marine biology and science, there's a book by Rachel Carson, which is Silent Springs, and that's a really, really brilliant book just to give you a little bit of background about science and marine biology.
Oh, brilliant. Always start at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely.
What was your most embarrassing experience at school?
Oh, that's a good one. I think school, it was a bit up and down. There were always embarrassing moments for me. I think the most embarrassing was that I wear glasses and I hate myself when I'm wearing my glasses. I'm literally like, I'd rather wear contact lenses. So I used to take my glasses off after I'd been in the classroom and go out to the playground to meet my friends without them. And I obviously couldn't really see because I'm pretty blind.
I know where this is going.
I just never knew. And the playground sort of went onto the field where everyone would be chilling and hanging about. And I just walked up to a complete group of strangers, like, hey, how's everything going? And I was a younger student, I think. So I had 3 schools, and that was year 5. And these were year 8s. And they just looked at me like, what are you doing? And I just walked away. I didn't even know what to say. I was just like, oh. And I think that was just like the most embarrassing, that I still remember it. And it still haunts me now, that it's like, always wear your glasses.
Yeah, just in case you walk up to someone and it's not what you thought. Next question is, what's the ugliest fish?
The ugliest fish? Oh, that is a really good question. I'd probably say there's some deep sea fish that are pretty ugly. It's a really hard one because everyone does assume that because I study marine biology, I know all the species of fish, and I actually don't. But one of the ugliest ones I'd probably say is quite a big one, which is the sunfish. I find that's just really creepy because it's huge. Or maybe a parrotfish because they've got these massive teeth.
Oh,
And I just think they creep me out.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit scary, if anything. What's the thing that annoys you most in life?
Ooh, that's a very broad question, I guess, for most annoying thing. Something that really, really annoys me is when I'm in the lab and I go to use something but people don't put it back. So I'm then running around the lab like, who's taken this? Where is it? And I just get really stressed.
I can relate to that, but more like clothes.
Oh.
Like if someone borrows your clothes.
And then they don't return it.
So annoying.
We have that problem with cutlery at my house.
Oh,
we can
do
never
you?
find any forks, and it's always a blame game.
Yeah, do you run around the house to
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Next listener question. Which do you prefer, the ocean or land?
So this is a brilliant question because even though I'm a marine biologist, I'd say land because I never grew up around the ocean. I'm someone who grew up quite inland and I never really went swimming that much, or especially in the ocean because it kind of scared me, and I never really went on boats. And it's only more recently that I've been exploring and really want to learn more. But I do a lot of my work from the lab, so I never go on the boat. And now when someone's like, do you want to go out into the ocean? I'm like, oh, I haven't done it in a while. So I'm quite I'm happy on the land because I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But I do like swimming, but I'd probably swim more in a swimming pool than the ocean.
Me too. So we're moving on to kind of our common misconceptions of the science and research industry. So you kind of briefly touched on one earlier, and I would say that my one would be that marine biology is the study of fish. That is actually what I thought it was until kind of, reading through your notes and learning that it was a lot more than that. So what other common misconceptions do you find?
Yeah, so definitely the misconception that it's not just fish, but I think everyone assumes that if you study science, you're a genius. They think you must be really intelligent, that you know everything, which is really not the case. There's a lot of us that have to Google things like, oh, how do you work out what this dilution is or something? We really have to Google basic things, like how do you convert milliliters into something else? It's really, we don't know everything. Other misconceptions I think about marine biology is that we all go diving and we all can scuba dive and that we go out on boats and live this really luxurious life, but I don't get to do any of that. I'm in a lab and it isn't the case of, I can't even scuba dive. I've never done it. So that's one thing, you don't have to be able to dive to be a marine biologist.
I was honestly about to ask you about how many times you go scuba diving.
Never. It's on my list to do. And there are quite a few people. So I share an office with loads of girls, about 6 of us, and none of them really dive. And we're all marine biologists. It's insane.
So that's a huge misconception.
Yes.
It's out of 6 of you, nobody dives. And I'm like Matt, I would have thought that was one of your everyday work life kind of duties almost.
Yeah, there's people that can go out on a boat and they can collect samples for us and they bring it back to us. So actually, I haven't been on a boat before. Or I've been on a boat, but I haven't been on a boat as part of my research.
Yeah.
What do you think people should know about being a marine biologist that might not be common knowledge?
I think definitely that it isn't as glamorous, maybe, as what it seems, because it isn't going to be diving constantly or out on a boat. Although there are some jobs that allow you to do that, the majority are research and data analysis, so you're actually sometimes sat at a computer. So I think some people think that you are out in the tropical ocean and you get to see the coral reef and you get to look at fish, but it isn't really like that. It's more computer-based, and for my case, it's in the lab and you never get to go out.
Oh, but that's a cool side to it still, isn't it? And it's a really important side of research. I feel like another thing that is a misconception, maybe just I have, and I haven't done any science since GCSE, so I'm way out of the science world, is that when I think about what a scientist looks like, I have an image in my head of Albert Einstein or Ernest Rutherford, all the ones you learn about at school. So would you say science and research is diverse? Or, because I still do have that idea that everyone looks a certain way. And obviously, meeting you, I'm learning that that's not necessarily the case.
Absolutely. I find that when you talk in front of people and say, what do you think a scientist looks like? They have this really defined image of these guys that you've seen maybe in your textbooks or on the TV. And we are just regular people. You could walk across the street and you might bump into a scientist and not think, oh, you don't look like a scientist. But now with social media, a lot more people are showcasing women in STEM, diversity in STEM, showing that you don't have to look or sound or have sort of the background as some of these prominent scientists do, but you can still be a good scientist and enjoy the field.
I think that's really good to hear, that it's kind of moving forward a little bit from middle-aged white men, basically.
Yeah.
So I'd quite like to move on now to talk about your own career journey and how you went from, folding clothes in a laundrette to working in a lab.
Yeah, I think my career path is perhaps a little different to other people that do science. And this may come back to misconceptions that people think you have to be really clever. I knew I was always interested in science. So from a young age, I got ant farms. I got these little sea monkeys that you can grow and all things.
Them.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember sea monkeys.
So I used to get all these things, but I used to think, oh, I don't look like a scientist. I don't want to be a scientist because it's going to be boring. You're not going to have a life. You're going to be this boring person. So I never really had the idea of being a scientist. I kind of maybe fell into it. But GCSEs, I was pretty average at science, better than my English and all the art subjects. So I was just like, naturally, I'll take sciences and math at A-level. And so I did. Unfortunately, in my AS year, I completely failed. I got a C in math, a D in biology, a D in chemistry, and a U in physics. Sorry, Matt, I'm not good with the physics.
I mean, I don't blame you. It's not easy, that AS
No.
physics. I remember not doing particularly well in it.
It was absolutely disastrous. So I decided to move to a sixth form college. I dropped physics completely, realised, okay, move on, you can't do this forever. So I took geography instead. I did a little bit better, but I still think I struggled with the exams and really just understanding what the exam board wanted from me. And I didn't get into my top choice university. So I actually went to Brighton University, which was my second choice. And I really sort of said to myself, okay, I'm going to do a biological science degree because I do quite like biology. I'm okay at it, even if I didn't get A's or A stars at all. And so going on to my degree, I was a year older than everyone else, or rather a year older than most people because I'd had to resat my A-levels. I was more, or I think perhaps I was a little bit more determined to say, okay, I want to change the narrative. I want to get better grades. So I really, really pushed myself. I worked part-time as a waitress and I really set some schedules to be like, okay, I'm going to really be studying and try and figure out how the exams work. And I actually came out with a first class honours. So I'd completely flipped it around and I was even shocked when I saw my final grade and I was like, wow.
I did that.
Yeah. I had no idea. I think it was a lot of hours in the library, but it is possible that even if you don't understand the exam system at school, you can still get through in life. And then after that, I actually worked. I tried to get a job in science, but I found that I didn't really have much lab experience, which is quite essential for people getting into science degrees. So I became a data analyst for an energy company. I worked there for a year, but it really just didn't stimulate me in the same way. And with science, I really found that you could solve different problems and it was a bit hands-on and you could do some computer work. And I really enjoyed that. So I decided one day, sat at my office desk, I'm going to apply for a master's. And I applied for the Master of Research in Marine Biology at Plymouth University. And I got in, got accepted, and I absolutely loved it. And I did a dissertation project, which actually got cut short because of COVID. So that was a bit of a shame that I really wanted the research experience, but I landed a PhD after it at the University of Exeter and at the Marine Biological Association, now doing what I'm doing.
That is an amazing career journey.
Thank you.
Was it harder going back to university to do your masters? Did you find it hard going back to university?
I think so. And I think for me, I was on quite a decent salary, and going from that and then going back to being on student loan and having to live in either shared accommodation or figuring out how you're going to do it. But I'd saved up enough money that I could afford to get the postgraduate loan that you can get, and then I could support myself while for some living accommodation. And I think for me, it wasn't really about the difficulty of making the move. It was more understanding what I like to do and what I wanted to do. So it really just drove my decision to say, I'm not really enjoying this job, and I think I would be better suited somewhere else.
I mean, it definitely sounds like it's a story of resilience, if anything. Like, how did you manage to keep your head up after you failed your ASs, after you didn't get into your first choice university? How did you kind of power through that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was that I have a really good support system with my family, and I was never really pushed for education. So neither of my parents have a degree. That even going to university or even doing A-levels was something that people, like my family, were like, wow, you're doing amazing. So they would always say, oh, it's fine, don't worry, just carry on, and whatever you do, we're proud of you. And I think that helped me to really push me to sort of think, okay, I'm going to do this for them and showcase that I can do this, I can go to university. And I think it was just more knowing that there was an end goal of being able to do something that I really love, and just kept pushing.
So at what point did you realise marine biology, that's the plan?
This is a funny one. So I really never knew much about marine biology, and with my biological sciences degree, I had one module which was on marine science. So people asking me about fish or all these other things, I'm like, I don't know. I didn't actually do that much studying. But I really like the idea that you can use human biology and bring aspects of that into marine science. So that's this interface of biochemistry and molecular biology coming into marine science. And I did a dissertation project on understanding how you may be able to look for antioxidants. So they're something that you can kind of help you, especially sports people, they can help you. It's a bit like vitamins and stuff, just something that can help you along the way in your fitness journey. If we could extract any of these antioxidants from mussels, and mussels from the sea, the ones in the shells. And it was this project that really made me think, wow, there's so much more to this than you might think. And it isn't just this, I've swam with a fish.
Yeah.
So for me, that's when it made me decide that I wanted to go into marine science.
So it's almost kind of the opposite for you. I think most people would hear, oh, marine biology is swimming with dolphins all day, and they'll be like, oh, I definitely want to do that.
Yeah.
As soon as you found out it's not, that's when you kind of wanted to get involved.
Yeah. I think because I didn't really grow up on the rocky shore, I didn't really grow up being able to, or I can swim, I didn't really swim in the sea that much, that for me it was quite almost scary to think the ocean is huge, maybe that's not for me because I'm not the strongest swimmer. But as soon as you can hear that you still get to explore all of this amazing marine life that's out there, and you can do it from a desk or you can do it from the lab, that opened up so much opportunity for me to know I get to explore the unknown, but from a place that I felt a bit more safe.
And obviously you do a lot of your work in the lab. So what's a day in the life of a marine biologist look like?
So
Doing lab-based work, obviously not the ones that go scuba diving.
yeah. So for me, every day is different. I'd maybe go in and log into my computer, check some emails, I guess like everyone does. And then I'd head to the lab, and I've probably already planned what experiments I'm going to do. So a lot of the time it's based off of my thesis project. So what are my aims? What do I want to achieve? And what am I researching? And I would go through the protocol. I'd get my samples, and my samples are grown in these little flasks, just with some seawater. The seawater's collected from other people. So I just go and get them from this room, and it's a cold sort of 18-degree temperature room. And I'd go and collect them, then work in the lab. You just get to do loads of different experiments or look down the microscope. And I work with microscopic organisms, so technically I'm also a microbiologist in that sense. So I get to do all sorts of cool things.
Out of interest, what actually is your thesis?
My thesis title is looking at plant-like microalgae. So they're teeny tiny algae. And when I say algae, you probably think, you know, when you see on a pond, this sludge that's just on the surface, no one really pays it any attention. That is pretty much what I research, but I'm looking at how they can explore and understand their environment. So they're really simple organisms. They're basically like a plant. They don't have a brain like we would or animals do. But they're really, really important in actually providing us with oxygen. So every fifth breath that we take are from these algae, but no one really knows that, or no one really seems to care. And we want to understand how we can maybe utilise them or understand their biology and their ecology and why they're so important. They form the base of the food chain, so they provide food and oxygen to all other organisms in the ocean. So my role is really understanding how they can adapt to a changing environment.
Now that sounds like really interesting, and you wouldn't think about algae as being so like fundamental. So with the bigger issues in the world at the minute with kind of climate change and global warming, can algae kind of help with all of that sort of stuff?
Absolutely, and that's what a lot of scientists are really trying to push. And the thing is that we need to understand a lot of the fundamental biology behind algae before we can push through to really explore them as use in biotechnology. But some things that people are currently looking at are as food sources. So obviously, if we have omega-3, which is something quite important for inflammation or reducing inflammation, we might get them as the omega-3 tablets, which come from fish. This is a problem with overfishing, that we may be using up a lot of the fish stocks, but actually omega-3 comes from algae that the fish have consumed. So this is a really great source that you might be able to get this omega-3 from and bypass the issue of having to harvest the fish. There are other things that they can look at instead of fuel sources. So at the moment we have a bit of a fuel crisis, and if prices are increasing, this is also a problem with carbon emissions as well, and how we can reduce that is going to something that's a bit more green, and that is algae. They're producing oxygen, they are taking up carbon dioxide, but can we also get something out of it? And one thing that we could is potentially biofuel. So it would just be a way that we could maybe supply fuel to cars or planes, but from algae.
Wow. Yeah, I'm speechless. So going back to school, I remember practicals being really good fun, but some things would sometimes go wrong. Have you ever experienced that? Have there ever been any lab mishaps with your experiments?
All of the time. I think 90% mishaps, 10% something good happens, or something that you expect. It could be anything from my stupid mistakes, because I've misread something and I will speak to someone after like, oh, I was a bit confused about this. And they're like, well, you're not meant to do that. And I'm like, oh, that's why it didn't work. I remember the first week I used this massive centrifuge. So this is basically a massive machine that spins liquid down really, really quick. So if there's any substance in it, it will spin it down to the bottom. So it uses sort of maybe some physicsy things to get these. I'm looking at Matt here.
I have no idea.
I'm looking at that too.
So it's mainly just this massive machine, and it spins down different particles from a liquid, so it will separate them. So you'll get the substance at the bottom and the liquid at the top. And you're meant to use certain tubes for this. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I just put them in these random tubes and put them in this machine, came to take all my tubes out, and the bottoms had all like come out. It had spun it so much that it had, through the gravitational force, it just completely broke all of my tubes, and all of the liquids were just swimming in this machine. And I just looked at it and I was so embarrassed I couldn't even tell anyone. I just quickly cleared it up and pretended it didn't happen. And then when someone asked me, oh, how did the experiment go? I was just like, yeah, it was really good. And I redid it again like the next day, but really rushed. And I came in super early so no one could see. And other people had said that it happened to them after I finally admitted it. But yeah, that was a really bad mistake, because I then had to, all the samples, sometimes they smell a little bit as well. So you have to really like wipe it all up.
That's really unfortunate. That's a good job nobody asked you for any notes and stuff, any findings.
No.
There was none.
I remember from my undergraduate when things went wrong. Obviously, I was always hungover. Could never be bothered to do it again. Just fudge the results. I'm guessing you're way past that now.
Yeah, I think they're a bit hot on that you can't fudge any results.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't think you could do a PhD. But
No.
I think for this, I didn't need the results there and then, so it was fine. You just pretend like nothing bad happens. But yeah, there are so many stories really that things go wrong. Or another story is that you have all these different tubes. So they're really tiny tubes, and you have these other bits that you put inside it, and you basically have to add some liquid into it that goes through the first tube into the second tube to collect it. And I only labelled the bottom tubes, and I'd completely just lent on it, and all my tubes went everywhere, and all the insides fell out, and I just couldn't match any of my samples, so I just had to throw them all away. And again, I always just say, oh yeah, it's gone fine, and then I just have to redo everything.
I'm sure everyone's in the same boat there.
Yeah.
I hope so.
So after you receive your PhD, what are your plans for the future?
So after my PhD, I would really like to go into biotechnology. I would like to apply the skills that I learn now and maybe move towards making sustainable foods, or even going in towards the biofuel industry.
So do you see yourself staying in more the research field, or maybe using it in industry, or even science communication?
So this is something that I'm quite interested in, is that I really like science communication as well. And I've been toying with the idea of, would I go more into science communication or would I stay in research? And I think there's something that really pulls me back to the research, which I love. I'm just not sure if I would be able to stay in it for my life. A lot of scientists stay and research the same thing for like 50 years, whereas I'm not sure if I do that. So at the moment, I'm undecided if I'll stay in research, but I would like to.
What does science communication, just for someone like me who's never heard of that or doesn't know what it entails, what does that consist of, and what kind of would you want to do in science communication?
I think with science communication, it is mainly just being able to take a really complicated scientific topic and take it to an audience that are from the general public and say, actually, it's not that complicated. We can explain it in a way that everyone can understand. And for me, science should be accessible to everyone. And I've always thought that. And I think for me as well, I'm not always getting the grades, not really understanding or following the textbooks or understanding what the exams mean. I think if something's explained in a really easy way, anyone can understand it. Sometimes things just seem a bit more complicated than they really are. And for me, I feel like I have a duty almost to take this really complicated stuff that's taken me years to really understand and give it in little snippets for people that can say, oh, okay, I've learnt this and this makes sense, or I now know that algae can produce oxygen and that's what we breathe. And
That's what I've just learned.
yeah.
I think it's a great service because I've obviously read my fair share of scientific papers. They are horrible.
Yeah.
So having a way to communicate that simply is very difficult, but it's also a great service to everyone else.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one thing as well, maybe with the misconceptions about scientists, is some scientists want to perhaps sound a little bit more intelligent and they use a lot of big words. And sometimes I read scientific papers. So these papers are essentially something that you base your current research on. So you'll say, okay, this scientist has done this research on this organism and found this. But to get to that answer, it's quite long-winded. And a lot of the time I just look at it and I have to reread something like 5 times. And other people are sort of like, oh, I've read this and it was really easy to understand. But for me, I've got no idea. So if there's a way that I can grasp it, understand it, and sort of regurgitate it out to someone else, but in a easy to understand way, that's something I'd like to do.
Yeah, that's really cool. Like me, I'm no clue about science really, but you've explained things so well that I actually understand it. My other question would be, what do you think of the hot topics for future research that you can if you had to predict things that, are going to be big areas of research in science, what would you say they would be?
I'd definitely say it's stuff to do with the application of what we want to know and understand, or utilising the ocean. So at the moment, people are looking for antimicrobial, or if you've heard of antibiotic resistance, a lot of people nowadays are becoming more resistant to antibiotics. So if you're taking antibiotics for medicinal purposes, but our bodies are getting so used to it that we can't fight off, or the antibiotics aren't doing their job, people are now going to the ocean and looking maybe at sponges or looking at all these other organisms in the ocean, saying, okay, we've never explored it before. Could we find some of these could we find any of these things for medicinal purposes, or for anything like food sources that we haven't yet found out that will be really good, and it might be quite sustainable if we can figure it out in the right way?
And do you think you'll follow that at all?
I'm not sure if that would go into any of my research, although I find that stuff absolutely amazing and I'd love to. I think some of that is a little bit over my head. But yeah, and that's another thing, is with people in science, you become quite niche. You don't know everything about all the topics and subjects, but I'd definitely love to read about it or figure out how people do it in the future.
You'll be admiring from a distance.
Exactly.
Yeah. Moving on to the most important part of the podcast, arguably. What is a piece of advice you would give to students who are either in the science and research field or are wanting to get into it? What's like a golden nugget of advice you would give?
I think it's really important that people try things that they might not think they like. And this is mainly because for me, I didn't go into marine biology from the start. I almost fell into it because I tried a module and I was like, wow, this is really cool. Whereas if I didn't do that module, I wouldn't be where I am today. I would have maybe followed a different path. So I think it's definitely trying something that even if you don't think it sounds great, unless you try it and see if you like it or not, you're never going to know.
Yeah, that's a really great piece of advice. Would you say some good advice to students is to cast their net wide, pardon the pun, and kind of be open to other research areas that they might not initially be interested in?
Absolutely. And I think that's the only reason that I am where I am today, is that I tried something that I wasn't really keen on maybe, or that I never really thought I had a future in. Hence why I'm not confident with the swimming in the ocean. But definitely there's so much out there, and even just science is such a broad term. There are so many different fields out there, even within the science, chemistry and physics. They are interchangeable, a bit like with the biophysics that Matt mentioned. You can really do anything, I suppose. So give it a try and see if you like it. And if you don't, you know that you don't need to carry on with it. You can try something else.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on today, Yaz. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
I've really learnt a lot.
I'm glad you have.
For our listeners that might want to kind of check out what you get up to, where can they find you?
So I mainly do science communication on Instagram, and my @ is Marine Biology with Yaz.
And any other social media platforms?
I use TikTok a little bit. I'm still quite new on TikTok, and that is the same @ Marine Biology with Yaz. And you can find me on Twitter @ Marine Bio with Yaz.
And if you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you drop us a like and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts from.
Next week, we'll be joined by copywriter and social media manager John Thornton.
He'll be discussing his career from working at Domino's to creating hilarious viral content for innocent smoothies.
You don't want to miss it. See you next week.